Hey everybody. We're going to be making the lingerie for Mrs. Tom Thumb, for Lavinia Thumb. And before we get started, just wanted to show you the materials that will be coming in your package. As Michael and all the other instructors say, make sure that you don't open this and strew stuff about, because you're going to need all of it. But you've got this really beautiful piece of fine batiste, and I'm not sure, but there probably will be a cutting diagram to show you how to lay out each one of these pieces before you cut it. So I would suggest, and it's really up to you, that you give this a good ironing with a little bit of moisture to get the creases out. And then you might want to just starch it a little bit as well, just to give it some body. You've got this great lace that Louise and Carmel Dahlchef have put together for you, as well as wire, cotton covered wire for the hoop, and tape for the hoop. And then you have these little cords that can be used as waist closures for the pantalettes and for the hoop and for the petticoats. And then Michael has found these really wonderful little, I think they're mother of pearl, but these little tiny 2-hole buttons as closures for the chemise and for the nightgown. So we're going to get started, and I'll take my own advice and I'll put this back until we need it. And get started, we're going to, as again, iron this, and then I'm going to copy the original and cut out the pattern pieces and get them ready. One thing just to make note of, you have 2 petticoats and you have a hoop that you're going to be making. All of them need waistbands. So here where it says 2 waistbands, you actually will need 3 cut on the straight. So we'll get this going, cut out, and we will start with the pantalettes and move on to the petticoat and the hoop. So we're making the pantalettes. Just one thing before we start. I don't know about you guys, but these kind of look a little bit similar to me in terms of the top and the bottom. So what I would recommend is you're going to need actually, excuse me, one that's facing this way and one that's facing this way, because you need them to be mirrored. So because the top and the bottom look very similar, and once you've cut it out, you might forget, you guys are probably much better at remembering than I am, but I put a little dot just to remember that this is the top and not this. It just helps me a little bit. So what we're going to be doing on the center back, the center front, and along the bottom, we're going to be doing a very tiny little hem. So what I've done is I have ironed down, I would say maybe about a 1/16 of an inch. Maybe that's a little bit more than a 1/16, but I've ironed down about a 1/16 of an inch. And then you don't really need to pin this because it's just so small and the fabric is just kind of delicate. You can probably just work with it. That's why we starch it a little bit too, because it makes it easier to handle and it kind of folds a little bit like paper. If I can just get my needle through there, my little fat finger. We're just going to do a very narrow hem on those edges. And, there's that great tip that Denise showed you in the wedding gown video. You could also do a faux rolled hem if you wanted, which is a great technique for tiny little things, and it gives you a beautiful finish. But for this one, I'm showing you just a very narrow little, probably that's about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch hem. And you see, because it has been starched, it has this beautiful crease to it, and it just makes it really easy to handle. I might actually also have used a lighter weight thread for this, because I generally do for white work but for demonstration, I want to be able to see what I'm doing. And I'm sure it makes more sense for you to see what I'm doing too. So we're just going to continue to go all the way to the end with little stitches. There's a simple hem stitch. You're going to keep going until you get to the end. Then you're going to secure your thread and then move on to the front hemmed opening and then the bottom hemmed opening. We're having a huge storm here. I don't know if you can hear that, but wow, we really do need the rain. It's a good thing. But I'm not sure if you can hear all that in the background. It's really kicking up a ruckus. So again, we've just folded this over, pressed it down with our handy Cricut iron. And, you know, you might want to just go back and give it a little iron after you're done. And then you see you've got this nice little folded hem here, folded edge. So again, I'm going to do the front hem, the bottom, and then I'm going to repeat it with this, which again is a mirror of this piece. So you've got a left and a right side for your pantalettes. There's enough fabric here, and the pattern calls for you to be able to do 2 sets of pantalettes, which is great. When we move on to trimming, we're going to be whipping this lace, which I think is called lace number 2, but it's 3/8 of an inch. It's in your kit. We're going to be whipping that to the hemmed bottom of the pantalettes. Maybe for the second pair, and I'm probably not going to do a second pair for this video, but maybe for the second pair you might want to do like a little feather stitching or do something slightly different, or maybe use a Swiss embroidery at the bottom. I don't know, just have a little variation since she'll have 2 pairs of pantalettes. So I will continue to hem. I'm going to whip the one side of the lace to the bottom of edge of this. I'll show you how to do that. And do the exact same thing to this, but again in a mirrored, as a mirror. And then we'll show you how to put them together. So we have left side and a right side, or a right side and a left side of your pantalettes. As I said, the 3 on the bottom and the center back and the center front have been narrow hemmed, and then we've whipped lace straight to the bottom. You're going to notice that I've actually turned down about 3/16 of an inch on the top. I only do this because I find that it's easier to, the instructions call for the top to be pressed later, but I think sometimes it's a little easier to do it while the piece is still flat and you haven't put it together. So what we're doing now is we are doing a French seam on the leg seam. This is a very small little garment, as you can see. I'm trying to maintain, well, really should be about a 1/16 of an inch, because this is an 1/8 inch seam allowance, which I failed to mention to you guys, that all of these garments are put together with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. But as you can see, this fabric frays, even just with the slightest handling, so I probably need to be a little bit over a 1/16. This is definitely over a 1/16, but I'm just taking tiny running stitches. And, you know, for you guys who haven't done French seams before, what you're basically doing, rather than doing right side together as you would if you weren't doing a French seam, you're doing wrong side to wrong side together. And you're creating one seam, which is what we're doing now. And then we are going to, let me just finish this up. You're even going all the way down to the bottom of the lace. And I've pinned this together just to give it a little stability, but you probably don't even need to do that because it's such a small piece, and the pins probably just will get in the way. We're just going to knot this off. Let me use my little scissors here. And this is where I'm not really a huge fan of French seams, I have to say, because they are, they're not. It's not an easy seam to do, but if it was easy, then anyone can do it, I think, is what Michael says. But you're going to trim with a very sharp pair of scissors as close as you can get to that seam. I'll gather up our little pieces without going into the seam, because I'm even kind of a little concerned that when I turn this, it might pull. So very, very gently, we're going to turn this inside out. And hopefully this is gonna work. Okay, so we've turned it inside out. So what we're basically doing is we're making sure that we have a good, you can even press this a little bit if you wanted to. We're making sure we've got a really crisp fold here on the sewn line. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sewing again and doing our best to encapsulate the raw edge, that raw cut edge of the first seam inside that next seam, so it's a finished. It's finished. So basically, the reason why this seam would be done in lingerie or in white work, it's that it stands up to washing. It's very strong, but it's also a good seam for these delicate fabrics, these thin fabrics that need a little bit of extra strength and might pull apart. So I'm just going to start this next seam and show you. Okay, so I'm going to start down here in the lace, and you can hide your knot fairly easily. And then I'm again taking tiny little running stitches. I'm going to sew along. It's probably again a little bit more than a 16th seam allowance, but it really should be a 16th. I'm going to sew along this edge, and I'm going to try, I don't know if you can see that, I'm going to do my best to encapsulate the cut edge of that first seam. So you're trying to, again, make these really tiny little stitches that will give it strength. Going a little fast because I want to, I have a lot to show you. But I think just, take your time, and, you could even do like a back stitch every couple of stitches just to keep it anchored. And then you're going to tie off, hide your thread here. Let's trim that off. These are small little garments, so they don't take as much time as the large garments, but they take just as much care because they're so small. And when you make the garments themselves, and I think Denise might have said this in her video, just be very careful that you're maintaining that 1/8 inch seam allowance, because they are a good fit. You just don't want them to be too tight, because you're dealing with a lot of very small little sleeves and such. So there's a little bit of fuzz that's come through here. I'm just gonna trim that off. When things get smaller, they get trickier. And then what I like to do, I probably will go back and trim a little bit more fuzz. I like to give it just a little press. And I might even press up the side a little bit too. So what we're going to do is, again, I had turned this down about a 3/16 of an inch. We're going to do our other set of legs, or our other leg, in exactly the same way. We're going to French seam that together, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to sew only approximately 3/16 inch from the top of the garment down, just to create basically to join these two separate pieces. And I'll show you how that works. But another thing I should have mentioned is, because you try not to handle these little pieces very much, because look how they fray. You might want to just touch them with a little clear nail polish. Just be careful when you run your iron over that clear nail polish, because it could melt onto the iron surface, but it can help it from fraying. If you want to be really crazy, you probably could touch it up with a little bit of watered down white glue, but that's just not necessary. The fast drying clear nail polish is great to help from fraying. So I'm going to do the other side. I'm probably going to open this up a little bit and get a better press there. Do the other side, and then come back and show you how to finish these pantalettes. So a couple of things have happened. We've sewn together the front, center front, about 3/16 inch from the top. We've sewn those two pieces together, so you've made a joined piece, but it's open, as it was in the 19th century for convenience. We've turned over 3/16 of an inch to the inside. Again, this is a very small garment. I think in a larger garment, it probably would have had a waistband, or you would have done a fold and then another fold to encapsulate that raw edge. But in this case, it's just going to be the raw edge, because we don't want to have all that bulk. And again, you've sewn a little channel with running stitches, tiny running stitches. And then there's this wonderful cord that is provided in your kit. And I think that Louise said this was maybe Swiss, and it really comes in very handy for piping and other things for doll clothes. But in this case, it's a three ply cord. I've already removed one, but you can see here in this piece, this is the cord as it comes together, but when you start to unravel it, you get these three pieces. So what you're going to do is you're going to unravel it. You're going to take one piece. Before you start working with it, you're going to want to try to iron it as flat as you possibly can. It has a little bit of memory, so it's going to be a little crinkly, but you want to get it flat. You're going to thread a large eye needle with the cord, and you're going to run it through your drawstring. So here we go, and just be careful, because again, the fabric is a little bit delicate. There we go. You're not going to need all of this thread. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this on Lavinia. The back is the higher piece. Let's just pull this up a little bit. And we're going to make sure that we tuck that in a little bit. We're going to tie it in place. You really need someone's finger to hold this, because it's such a small, I've got fat little fingers. Let's see here. Okay. You can adjust your bow. Make it a little bit smaller, more delicate. Tighten it up. There we go. And adjust your gathers a little bit. And then, what you can do is you can tie a little knot at the end of these ties and trim that off. Do that on both sides. So that little knot's going to help things from unraveling a little bit. Even though this isn't going to have much wear, you're probably going to always have her pantalettes on her. But you see, it's a really very simple little, it's a very simple little garment to make, and the French seams will help it from fraying. If you want, and I probably will do this on the second pair, is I will take some of the clear nail polish and I will seal the top of this cut edge. So when it folds over, you won't have any fraying. And that way it just looks so much nicer and neater. And there we are with her pantalettes. They're not exactly the same length, so we're gonna do that again a little bit. Make this a smaller knot here. If I can just do it with my little fingers. Yes, there we go. And then we're gonna trim that off. So there you have it, her pantalettes. And we will now move on to the hoop. And I guess this is sort of like, I'll pull this thread out. This is sort of like dressing her as she probably would have been dressed back at the day. I'm not sure, and Michael will have to correct me, the chemise that we're going to be making, some of her dresses are quite off the shoulder. Some of them have kind of like tight sleeves. I'm not sure if she would be wearing the chemise under her clothing because of the bulk, or you might just want to display that chemise. But in any case, we're going to move on to the hoop, and then we'll go on to the chemise, and then we'll start our petticoats. So I changed my mind. I'm going to do the chemise next rather than the hoop, because really I think, and again, I think I've heard a couple of different ways that they used to wear their chemises. I believe that the chemise would go next to the skin. Obviously, it would be your first layer. And then they would tuck the chemise into the pantalettes. And then they would start to put their corset and their corset cover, then their hoop, then their petticoats, in that order. So just, to humor me, myself, I'm going to do the chemise next, even though, as I said, I don't know if she could actually wear the chemise under some of her costumes because of the bulk. So what we've done is we've cut one of the chemises out on a fold. So basically you have one piece, no shoulder seams. We've cut down the very center front an inch. We've slashed that an inch. And what we're going to do is we're going to narrow hem, and this one I think I probably will do as a rolled hem, the front opening around the neckline and down the other side of the opening. So I should have probably have knotted my needle before I did this. And this is very similar to the technique that Denise used in the wedding gown bodice. But I don't know if it's going to be as pristine as hers. She is a wonderful, wonderful seamstress. So what you're doing is you are taking an anchoring stitch. Well, first of all, and these things are so fiddly and small, you're folding over probably, I don't know, that's probably about 1/16 of an inch over. And you're taking a little stitch underneath that cut edge of the fold, and then you're going up through the top of the fold, like Denise had shown you, and probably her instruction is going to be much better than mine. But then you do the same thing, and you just sort of keep this sort of like zigzag going for a couple of stitches. You could also do this by that sort of very narrow hem that I had shown earlier. Maybe I might actually do that on the top, I'm not sure. But this is actually good for when you're doing curves and such, because it sort of helps you to maintain the curve. So holding, let me get this straight so you can see this. So holding one end of it, you're going to pull, and you see how it just basically rolls over onto itself, creating that nice little rolled edge. So easy to do. I know some people, like I've seen Deborah Jenkins do a very, very, very beautiful rolled hem. I think it takes some practice. But this is sort of like I won't say it's a cheater's way of doing it because you have to do it just as nicely as you would anything else, but you're creating that same effect of a rolled hem. So what we're going to do is we're going to go, as I said, all around this neckline and down to the other end. Then probably what I'm going to do is, once it's all been hemmed and I've pressed it, I'm probably going to put it together and take a couple of just stitches here just to give it a little bit of extra strength here so it doesn't pull. So once I've done that, we're also going to do the same technique with the sleeves. This one might actually be a narrow hem, I'm not sure yet. And then I'm going to show you how to trim it and to put it together. So we're going to start to trim our chemise. We've hemmed around the front opening and the neckline. We've hemmed each one of the sleeve edges. And now we're going to take this lace, narrow lace edging number 3, and we're going to apply it flat on the ends of the sleeves, the edges of the sleeves on both sides, and we're also going to apply it around the neckline. Now when we apply it around the neckline, we're going to be easing it a little bit around these curves so it will lie nice and flat. So once that's done, we're going to put right side to right side, and Louise's instructions don't call for a French seam on these long seams, the underarm and down to the hem. You could do that if you want. I'm just going to do a running stitch and probably overcast it, trim and overcast it just to neaten it up, and then do a small hem, a narrow hem on the bottom. And then there's one little last touch that we're going to do, and I'll show you that when we come back to the sleeves. And then we're going to take one of these wonderful little buttons that Michael's provided in this kit, and we're going to do a thread loop and button closure for the neckline. So we'll finish that up and we'll come back and show you the final garment. The chemise is done. It's really cute on her. We've applied the lace around the neckline and on the sleeves, and we've done a very narrow hem at the bottom of the chemise, and we've put this adorable little button on with a thread loop. One thing I will mention, and again, all of these dolls are slightly different, but if she is going to wear this garment, I would recommend either be very, very scant with your seam allowance on the sides, or you might want to add just, let's say, 1/8 of an inch on either side of this before you cut it out, just to give her a little bit more room. When I did put this on my doll, it was very tight on the sides. It might be because I didn't exactly use the 1/8 inch seam allowance, but I think it probably could use just a little bit more room. And if you don't want to, if you just want it for display, no need to do anything. As I said, a lot of Lavinia's dresses are sort of like low necklines, and if she's going to wear this, and I think I actually will have her wear this and see if it works with half of her garments, because it's not as bulky as I thought, especially with this very, very thin, fine batiste. We've put this adorable little button in place, and there's a thread loop that holds the neckline together. So there she is in her chemise. And then we're going to move on to the hoop. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut 2 identical pieces on a fold. One will be the front and one will be the back. And then, much like we did with the pantalettes, we're going to French seam these together. So we're going to do 2 French seams on one French seam on each side, and then we're going to slash down the center back, and we're going to create a very narrow hem on that center back. And then I'm going to show you the next step. But before I do, one thing I failed to mention is on the pattern piece, you're going to see these dashed lines. These dashed lines actually are the location of your tape casings for your wire. So In this case, I've transferred these with the Frixion pen, which is that great pen that allows you to mark on fabric and then heat takes out the marks. So I just think while it's flat, it's always easier to do this. When you iron, you're going to probably remove some of the markings on the sides, but you're still going to have that general marking. And then once the casing is sewn, and I'll show you how to do that, you just iron it and these marks will just disappear. So that is what we're going to do next. And I will come back after we have done our French seaming and our slashing and show you the next step. Here's our progress on the hoop. We've French seamed both long sides. We slashed the back center opening 1 inch and we narrow hemmed it on either side. We did a very narrow rolled hem on the bottom. And then we applied lace. Now, the instructions say to apply it straight, but I actually curved it very, very slightly so it would follow the curve of the skirt bottom. It's not really gathered, it's just a little easing. And then, using the marks that we had transferred onto our fabric from the pattern with the Frixion pen, we have started to stitch down on either side of the cotton tape, little running stitches. And basically what we're doing here is we're creating a channel that we will feed this wire into, the cotton covered wire that's been provided. We'll feed this in and we will bend it to shape, to this oval shape that the hoop skirt has. So one thing about this wire, it's going to come coiled in your kit. You just want to try to straighten it out as best you can. It's always easier to work with it when it's straight. There are going to be some kinks in it and such, but you can go through once it's been inserted and deal with those. As you're putting it through though, you're probably going to want to gently bend it to shape because a straight piece isn't going to go very well around these curves. So you're going to find yourself sort of manipulating it as you go along. And I'm going to do that. Actually, I'm going to continue to stitch down the top of this upper tier of the casing and then put in the wire and show you how we cover it up on the top and the bottom rows. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about the next steps, which would actually entail putting a waistband on the top of the hoop and running our cord through as a tie. So we'll be back in a little bit. So we've put our wire through the casings. And then at the back, this one's not as neat as it should be, we've just basically overlapped and sewn down the tape where that join was, where it was inserted. So I'm going to turn it inside out so you can see what this looks like. There's a little smudge here that I think I'll be able to fix. And a little thread here that we need to get rid of. I think when you're putting the wire through, because the batiste is so fine, just be careful that you don't poke through the fabric when you're inserting the cord, but rather the wire, but it should go through pretty quickly and easily. Okay, so here we are with our two wire inserted hoops, and I've also just taken a running stitch, a gathering stitch along the top of the hoop, and what we're going to do is we're going to find the center, and then we're going to find the center of the waistband that we've already cut, and we've pressed back the two short ends about 1/4 inch on either side. We're going to find that center. We're going to align, oops, not quite the center, there we go. We're going to align the centers. It might not have to come in that much. We're going to be putting our our cord through here and pulling it up. So that will create some, bring in the waist and create some gathers as well. Yeah, it doesn't look like we have to pull this up very much at all. It's just a tiny little bit. And who knows, maybe when your doll, when you fit this to her, you might need a little bit more or less. But again, what we're doing here is we're creating the waistband, but we're also creating sort of a casing for the drawstring. So we're going to sew that across the top and put another little pin for good measure. I'm going to sew that across the top, and I should have knotted my needle. Just knot a little trim. And with a tight running stitch, again, we're going to sew this across the top. Waistband across the top. Let's see. It's a pretty small waistband, actually. I think she calls for a 1/2 inch high, so there's really not a lot of turnover. It really just becomes, you know, I guess is proportionate to Lavinia. It's a small waistband for a small lady. So we're just going to go all the way across here with this tiny little running stitch. And then once we've stitched that up, we may want to just trim that seam a little bit, or rather, yeah, trim that seam allowance. Maybe, yeah, about that much. And then we're going to turn it up, turn it under, and turn it over and stitch, blind stitch it on the back. So I will finish that up and then come back and show you the final hoop on Lavinia with the drawstring. And again, we're going to insert that drawstring very much like we did with a large eye needle through the casing as we did for the pantalette. So I will be back in a little bit. So Lavinia's hoop is done. This is such a cute little foundation garment, and it really does give a beautiful shape to her skirts. I really enjoyed making this, and I hope that you do too. So I'm going to show you petticoat number 1 finished because it's really very simple, and then I'll move on to petticoat 2 and show you that. But basically it's a rectangle of fabric and the dimensions are provided in the pattern. We French seamed the back, and then we've done a narrow hemmed opening 1 inch from the top of the skirt. We've applied lace flat to the hemline, and we have gathered it to fit our waistband. And we have also just inserted the cord as we did on the hoop and the pantalettes. So it's a very, very simple garment. Number 2, petticoat number 2 is a little bit more, I wouldn't say it's complicated, but there's just a little bit more of a step to it. It's a larger petticoat, it's wider. It probably will have much more fullness than petticoat number 1. But Louise has asked for 3 tucks. The first tuck is going to be placed a 1/2 inch from the bottom of the skirt, from the unhemmed edge, and then you're going to go up another 3/8 of an inch and another 3/8 of an inch. And basically, I'm just basically telling you how I would do this, but you can do it however you want. I've pulled a thread in the fabric before I cut out this piece just to establish what the grain of the fabric was. And then I pulled another thread at 1/2 inch, another thread at 3/8, and another thread at 3/8. And this just really helps you to maintain a really straight, pretty tuck. You might want to starch this a little bit too, because it is much easier to do tucks when the fabric is slightly starched. So what we're going to do is we're going to find that pull line, and we're going to finger press it. And then we're going to run a tiny running stitch, probably about 2 to 3 threads away from that folded edge. And we're going to do that for all 3 of these. And then we're going to press them down. I'll do that. I'll come back and show you the next step, but it's going to be very similar to what we've done previously, where we've hemmed the bottom, we've French seamed, we've left a 1 inch opening, we've applied lace. In this case, it's going to be the lace that you have left over after you've done your pantalettes, your 2 pairs of pantalettes and your petticoat number 1. And you're going to just basically pull up the gathering thread in the header to fit this width. So this particular lace will not be applied flat. It will have a little bit of a gather. I think you probably would want to do this when you're applying lace, straight lace or flat lace. You can do that, and then you can do your French seams. So that's all captured together as it was done here. Actually, I didn't do that here. I just overlapped them. But you can do that before you French seam. But when you're gathering lace, you want to make sure that you apply that after the piece is put together, as it's seamed and it's hemmed. And then you'll just basically overlap it and hide that overlap. So I'm going to go away and get this started and come back and show you progress. So here is progress on petticoat number 2. We've put the tucks in and we've pressed them down. You know, I think that pulling thread is a really nice way of keeping something aligned. So you don't really have to measure and be that careful with your measurements, because you've already got that straight line. We French seamed the back and we narrow hemmed the opening. And now we're going to gather up the lace that was left over from the pantalettes and petticoat number 1. And we're going to gather that to fit the bottom, apply it to the bottom of the hem with a little running stitch. And then we're going to put 2 rows of gathering at the top and gather it to fit the waistband. In this case, I think what I'd really like to do is I don't want to have too much bulk here. So I'm going to fold back possibly more, maybe about a 1/2 inch off that waistband, because we've got a little bit, maybe make it a little bit of a tighter fit. And then I'll come back and show you the finished petticoat. Well, Lavinia's undergarments are pretty much done. We have her petticoat number 2 with the tucks. We have her petticoat number 1 with the flat lace, no tucks. We have her hoop. We have her pantalettes. And of course we have her chemise. So she's pretty much ready to be dressed and have the right silhouette for the 1860s. We're going to move on now to the nightgown, and I just want to walk you through some of the parts and pieces before we start putting it together. We have a front and a back. They're identical. We have 2 identical sleeves. We have a bias strip, which is going to trim the neck. We've got a yoke front and a yoke back, which is made out of 2 pieces. We have the adorable little button, and we have this lovely lace that we're going to be using to trim. So one thing before we get started is that, much like some of the other garments, we're going to slash the back by approximately 1 inch. And you're going to hear my little dog. We're going to slash the back by 1 inch, and we are going to hem it, narrow hem it as we did on the other garment, on the other pieces on either side. And then we're going to sew the fronts and the backs together, right sides together, at the shoulder seams. Again, these are very tiny little pieces, so you'll need to just handle them as little as you possibly can, because you can see they can start to fray. One thing just to note is that I have already hemmed the edges of these, the inside edges, or where they'll meet. And I've also hemmed the bottom of the sleeves. I just did a little rolled hem. We are going to be trimming the bottom of the sleeves with lace, and once the neckline is bound, we're going to be trimming that with the bias strip. But I'll show you that as we get to it, and when we come back, hopefully we'll have some of this assembled, perhaps one sleeve and one of the fronts, just to show you how that all comes together. So we will get started and we will be right back. So just wanted to share the progress of the nightgown with you. Quite a bit has happened since we last saw it. I'm going to show it to you from the front. We have used the bias piece of fabric that's called for in the pattern to bind the neckline. And I haven't put the lace on yet because I want to show you what that looks like before the lace is applied. Then we've gathered the front of the nightgown. Remember, the back is the one that we have slit down the center about an inch from the top of the piece, and we have narrow hemmed either side of that opening. We have gathered the front to match the width of the yoke. And one thing I just wanted to say is that when you do this, you probably want to concentrate your gathers a little bit, towards the center, because you're going to need to have an ungathered piece at the underarms for when you put in your sleeves. So you're going to do that. You're going to sew that in position. You're going to overcast your seam. And then you're going to do the same thing with the left and the right hand sides of the back of the yoke, where you're going to gather them to fit both sides. And you're going to sew that and overcast that. Then you're ready to put your sleeves in. I actually think that she might call for gathering the top of the sleeve, but I think it's really only for easing, because there's no fullness here, at least the way that it worked for me. But you can see when you work with it what will happen. So then before we had done that with the sleeves, we had put on a straight piece of lace on the sleeve edge. So what we're going to do now that this has sort of been assembled, front and back, we're going to join the front to the back along the side seam and the sleeve seam. And it's really just very simple. You're just going to be matching up that underarm seam and the lace. And then you're also going to be matching the bottom of the nightgown, and with a small running stitch, closing that off in 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then you're going to overcast that. And we're going to do that on both sides. I think maybe just for ease, before I do that, I'll put the lace onto the neckline. I just really wanted to show you what that looked like before it was applied. I will close up the side seams. I will put the closure in the back, and I'll show you the finished nightgown in our next segment. So here she is in her finished nightgown. We've done a narrow hem at the bottom. We've done a thread loop and a button closure. And when the doll was dressed in the nightgown, when Lavinia rather, we gathered around the bottoms of the sleeves just to tighten them up a little bit. It's much easier to do when it's on her rather than off her. And then because I just felt like she needed a little bit of additional headwear, I did a very, very quick little nightcap for her. And this is basically about, I would say maybe an inch, 1.25 by 2.25 rectangle of fabric. 2 of the long ends have been turned under, and then lace has been flat applied, although it really looked pretty, I think, gathered, but flat applied over the front. And then in the back, we've just drawn that up with a very tight little gathering stitch and tied it off, and then taken another piece of long lace, centered it in the back, and just stitched it on flat and used it as ties. So there she is with her little nightcap and her nightgown. And she's wearing her pantalettes and her chemise underneath this, which I don't think she would have in real life, but it's just because I'm lazy and did not want to take them off. So hopefully you guys will have a lot of fun. I think you will, making these little undergarments for her. We have our 2 petticoats. As we said, we have her pantalettes, and, again, making a second pair. There'll be enough fabric for you to do 2 pairs. And lace, and her chemise, and her wonderful little hoop. One thing I also did want to mention with the hoop is that as I was looking at this, I thought, I think that there might be a little bit too much bulk. So I removed the waistband and turned it over the same way that you really would the pantalettes, and it seems to work quite well. I think it'll work with a waistband too, but I just wanted to throw that in there. So there we go, and hopefully you will make these up, and she can get dressed to the nines now that she has all of her required undergarments. Thank you.
Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button.